Previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, you're watching The Discussion with me, Inaya Folarin Iman. We discuss the big moral, cultural and political questions of our time. We've got a packed show for you today. The parents' revolt against critical race theory. Is populism making a comeback? And is it time for a radical approach to housing? All that coming up and much more. But first, here's the bulletins.
Good afternoon, it's exactly 3 p.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Zelensky and US President Biden are set to discuss ongoing efforts to de-escalate the crisis with Russia. It comes as some airlines announced that they were cancelling or diverting flights to Ukraine amid fears of an imminent invasion. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has returned to London from a family vacation as he says an attack is highly likely. Speaking to GB News, Defence Select Committee Chair Tobias Ellwood likened the current situation to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
He respects strength. We should have sent a division into Ukraine months ago. We should be putting in a no-fly zone now. There are massive consequences for allowing this to happen. You know, there's talk of Munich. Ben Wallace has been speaking about this. Look what happened there when we hesitated and we ceded control of parts of Europe. Where did that all end? You know, the world is changing fast. The West is looking too risk averse. America is nowhere to be seen. And normally when America steps back, absents itself from the international stage, that's when Britain steps up to the plate.
Tobias Ellwood. The government must learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation if Russia invades Ukraine. That's according to Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy. He's calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas in order to help people leave the country. Meanwhile, he's written to the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, saying the Labour Party stands united with the government over Russian aggression. Britons have been told by the Foreign Office to leave Ukraine immediately as Russia could launch an attack in the coming days. The Prime Minister insists he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he's leaving London and starting the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to northwest England, where he will visit an oncology centre. Mr Johnson says the government is focused on working to unite and level up the country. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it's time to reverse this moratorium. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. Lord Frost says ending it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in the Observer newspaper, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the Met had been shattered by a series of scandals. Mr Khan said he'll work closely with Priti Patel on the selection of Dame Cressida's successor. 7 people have been rescued after a mezzanine floor collapsed last night at a pub in East London. Ambulance crews declared a major incident at the 2 More Years bar in Hackney Wick. Medics treated 13 people, 3 with potentially serious injuries. A man who was at the venue at the time described hearing a cracking noise before the floor collapsed. The International Atomic Energy Agency is reviewing plans to release 1 million tonnes of water from Japan's Fukushima nuclear power plant. The water has been used to cool the plant's reactors damaged in the 2011 tsunami. Japan now plans to discharge the treated water into the sea next year. Neighbouring China and South Korea have objected to the move. Police have moved in to clear and arrest the remaining protesters near North America's busiest land border crossing, the Ambassador Bridge in Canada. Demonstrators opposing vaccine mandates had occupied the bridge for 5 days, slowing trade and prompting President Biden to call for an end to the siege. Police barricades remain in place, and it's not immediately clear when the bridge might be fully reopened. Fully vaccinated British travellers heading to France no longer have to take a coronavirus test before departure. The travel rules have been eased just in time for the half-term holidays, with many holidaymakers expected to head to French ski resorts. The move comes after the UK significantly eased its own rules for arriving travellers. OK, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to the discussion.
Welcome back to the discussion with me, Inaya Folarin Iman. Now, Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi has today said schools must stop teaching children what has been described as activist propaganda. Mr Zahawi vowed to make it clear to teachers their job is about education, not indoctrination, and says he will publish new guidance which will make things easier for staff to know where to draw the line. This comes after Brighton and Hove Council sparked uproar from many parents and also groups like Don't Divide Us, anti-racist groups recently, following the unveiling of their anti-racist education plans, with some parents pulling their children from classrooms. In the plans, children as young as 7 were to be told that they are not racially innocent. So, are our schools being used to push forward narrow political ideologies? What is the purpose of education? And how do we prevent activist education? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Joanna Williams, the founder and director of the independent think tank KIO. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, Joanna. Firstly, could you just tell us a little about what has been happening in Brighton?
Yes, and thank you for having me. So this isn't a programme which is actually taking place directly with children, but this is a racial literacy programme for teaching staff. So it's teaching teachers, if you like, and telling teachers how they should conduct themselves in the classroom, how they should deal with children, and how they should coordinate discussions when issues of race arise in the classroom. And you're absolutely right, the key message of this training programme seems to be that young children, even very, very young children, are not racially innocent, that children as young as 6 and 7 are attaching a value to race based on people's skin colour, that they are putting white people at the top of a racial hierarchy and black people lower down the racial hierarchy, and that even very young children can have feelings of white supremacy, if you like, which may be more covert or overtly expressed, and that they need to be educated in the existence of their white privilege. And obviously the flip side of this is actually instruction for black pupils that they are racially disadvantaged and racially discriminated against. And it just seems to me that my own experience of having children and working as a teacher is that the really great thing about children, actually, particularly very young children, is that they tend not to see each other as representatives of different racial groups. You know, they're far more interested in who's best at football, or, you know, who's got the nicest new jacket, or whatever it is. You know, they're not judging each other by skin colour. And so it seems to me that what's so terrible about these lessons is it really sends a message to children that they should be judging each other in that way.
But why do you think this is such a problem? I guess the counter-argument would be that in the height of the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, many educational establishments and many institutions across the country felt a responsibility, essentially, to respond to what was the emotive anger that was being expressed around what some people perceived of as racism being a problem that is rife within British society. And they would argue that many of these measures are effectively trying to rise to the challenge that was brought forward to them in 2020. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I'm sure you're absolutely right. I think if we want to be charitable, that definitely is what's driving these courses, and it particularly was a response to the Black Lives Matter movement that sprung up, particularly in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. But I think we have to be really careful about importing problems into places that don't exist. So it's almost as if we've taken a really horrific incident that happened in the US with adults and with police officers, and we've kind of said that it's somehow appropriate to draw lessons from that one horrific incident, which must then shape how we deal with young children in primary schools, even in the UK. And to me, that's a very tenuous connection to start drawing, because there is definitely a problem over here. We must therefore reach for solutions in rural primary schools in Brighton. So my fear is that in responding to an imagined problem or a projection of a problem, you're creating problems where they don't actually exist. And certainly, again, speaking as somebody who's worked in classrooms, was a teacher for a number of years, you would hope that if teachers did become aware of particular incidents of racial abuse, racial discrimination taking place among the children, that teachers should definitely act and nip that in the bud and have words with the pupils and tell them why behaving in that way is absolutely not appropriate, not a good thing for them to do anywhere, least of all in a classroom. But I think what's being proposed with these racial literacy teacher training sessions is actually something quite different. It's not about nipping a problem in the bud that has occurred or dealing with the problem that does exist. It's about preempting problems before they exist.
I mean, what impact do you think that this type of training, this type of education will have on young people? I mean, some of the things that I worry is that, a young black kid could be potentially really demoralised by, growing up in a classroom where, they've got lots of friends from all different backgrounds and being told by positions of authority that the society that they've grown up in is, in some senses, structured against them by no fault of their own. I mean, what impact do you think that narrative can have?
Yeah, I absolutely share your concerns. And I think when people here talk about white privilege, their instinct for many people is to look at the impact of that on white children. Like, oh, how dare you tell white children that they are privileged just because of the colour of their skin, and can point to white children who might grow up in all kinds of terrible circumstances and may not be very privileged at all. And I think that's certainly not a good thing to do. And we shouldn't go around telling white children that they're privileged just because of the colour of their skin. But I think what's missed often from that discussion is how this can be just as detrimental to black children as well, because I think you're absolutely right. The message that then comes to them is that no matter what their circumstances, no matter what the reality of their daily lives is, they're being given a message that the world is stacked against them, that they may as well give up without even trying, because the odds are so much against them. They're going to face so much discrimination and so much prejudice. They're never going to succeed in life. So why even bother trying? And I think that's every bit as bad a message to be sending out to black children as messages of inherited privilege are to white children.
And also, I mean, Joanne, what do you think is the difference between education and indoctrination? Because, we've seen the so-called decolonize the curriculum movement, the disrupt text movement, and they would argue that actually what we have now is indoctrination. They say that, and we've been taught a very limited and narrow perception of our history that's kind of wiped out and diminished the horrendous things that have happened. And what they would argue that what they're doing is actually trying to move it more towards education, where we have a much more informed discussion about the horrors of slavery and colonialism and so on. So it does seem like there is a fine line, and that debate is highly contested.
It absolutely is. And to me, I think a lot of this hinges upon the definition of values, for example, and the confusion that we seem to have nowadays between the role of the school in imparting knowledge and inculcating particular values in young people. And I think one of the reasons why we've got to this situation is that over so many years, I'm really talking a number of decades now, teachers themselves have lost faith in a project of imparting knowledge to young people, of actually saying, Shakespeare or whoever it might be, Pythagoras, whatever, these thinkers, writers are really worth knowing in their own terms. And again, I think something that's perhaps overmissed a little bit is, to me, it seems very, very racist to say to Black children, you can only learn knowledge from Black thinkers. If a thinker is white, then it will be completely alien to you. And for us to have a relevant curriculum, we need to put Black thinkers and writers on the curriculum, because Black children won't be able to they'll feel alienated from learning Dickens or Shakespeare or Pythagoras, for example. And again, I think that's just as damaging to Black children and white children, because knowledge doesn't have a skin colour. When you look at be it Newton or science, these things don't come with skin colours attached. Knowledge is valuable in its own terms. Knowledge is not linked to the skin colour of a person who came up with that knowledge. And the beauty about Shakespeare's plays, for example, is that we can all interpret them in different ways, and we can read into them a kind of real essence of what is universal in the human experience. Feelings of grief, of loss, of joy, of pride, these are human emotions that transcend not just centuries, but also transcend skin colour as well. And I think the problem is schools have so lost faith in the capacity to pass on knowledge that they're quite keen to latch on to particular values that they can promote, because it gives them a mission, it gives them a sense of purpose. But I think when you start reaching for values rather than knowledge, you very quickly get into a very contested political terrain. And that's when the boundaries between inculcating a certain political outlook, indoctrinating a particular ideology, and teaching knowledge actually get very, very blurred.
And what do you think about parents' role within it? It has been interesting, some of the parents pushing back against it in Brighton, but we've also seen very similar echoes, the parents' revolt against critical race theory in Virginia in America, which did seem to be quite instrumental in overturning the Democratic Party's hold in Virginia. Do you think parents have a right to know what their kids are being taught? Because it does seem that over the last few decades, the authority of parents has increasingly been eroded.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and it's something that I've personally changed my mind on quite a bit over the years. Perhaps hypocritical. When I was a teacher myself, I thought parents shouldn't have so much of a say, and now as a parent, I think we should have more of a say. But I think ultimately it's not just a personal whim that I've changed my mind on. I think it does come down exactly to what I was saying about the difference between values and knowledge. I think the area where teachers can very confidently claim to have expertise, or should claim to have expertise, is in relation to their subject knowledge. I have absolutely no intention of going and telling maths teachers, for example, how to teach maths. I wouldn't have a clue how they should go about doing that, and I wouldn't know whether they were taking the right approach or the wrong approach. But as soon as those maths teachers start to teach about sexual consent, for example, or about relationships, or about race, or about protecting the environment, suddenly they're moving outside of the area of their specialist expertise, and they're teaching, as we were saying earlier, they're teaching values. And I think if these were values that were shared by everyone in society, then it would be things that parents would be quite happy to get on board with. For example, if it was the value of working hard to get good exam results, to improve your chances of getting a good job in life, you know, the value of appreciating knowledge, I think these are values that all parents would be happy to buy into. But when they become very contested, very political values, they then rub up against the values of the home. And I think it leaves a lot of parents feeling very alienated from the school system, because you're thinking, why are my children going to school to learn something which is so different to what I think and believe myself? And why is my child coming back with this kind of political outlook which is so different to my own? And I think at that point, it does give parents a right to know, what is my child being taught? What values are they being enculturated in the school environment? And where have these values come from? And I think pushing back against that is an important thing for parents to do.
Yeah, and finally, on that point on pushing back, I mean, what we've seen in America is some bans of critical race theory being taught in some states. And I mean, some people have expressed worry that that could be a kind of illiberal backlash, essentially, to this. I mean, does that demonstrate that, you know, people that disagree with critical race theory are losing the argument that they're moving towards banning? Or actually, is it important to make sure that harmful, racially essentialist ideologies are not being taught to kids in school? What do you think?
Yeah, I actually think the Minister for Equality's Kemi Badenoch called this absolutely right when she said that these theories mustn't be taught as fact, because the way I understood that was that it is okay to have a discussion about these things in the classroom. You know, certainly with older children, I'm thinking older teenagers in the context of sociology classes, for example, current affairs discussion classes, you know, it would be wrong to actually ban and say you mustn't talk about these things, because I think children are curious, they know what's going on in the world, and the classroom is actually a really good place in some contexts to be discussing these ideas. I think where it becomes a problem, exactly as Kemi Badenoch indicated, was when these theories, and they are just theories and ideas, when they start being taught to children as fact, when children are told you are privileged because of the colour of your skin, you are disadvantaged because of the colour of your skin, you know, that's when it starts to become so dangerous. So I guess I wouldn't be in favour of an outright ban, because I think it would rule out discussion. It would also suggest that these theories can't be challenged and called into question. But I think it's the teaching as fact that's very, very problematic.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, Joanna Williams, founder and director of KEO, an independent think tank. Very, very interesting stuff. After the break, we're asking, policing bad apples or systemic failings? We'll also be discussing much more. But first, take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking rather wet and windy at first, but rain and wind will gradually ease overnight. Let's take a look at the details. After a rather wet day in the southwest, it will turn drier this evening. Winds will gradually ease too, but it will be remaining on the cloudy side. A wetter end to the day across the southeast as heavy and persistent rain continues. It'll be windy here too. Also a cloudy end today across Wales, but rain will be lighter than it was earlier. Patchy rain and drizzle will continue throughout the evening and overnight. Across the Midlands now, rain will gradually ease, leaving a cloudy evening with outbreaks of drizzle at times. Heavy rain will clear northern England this evening, but the thick cloud could still bring some light rain at times. The cloud and brisk wind will keep temperatures up. It will be a wetter end to the day across Scotland, with some persistent rain and a little snow as well over the Highlands. Now, a damp end to the day also across Northern Ireland. The rain from earlier will bring a fair amount of spray on the roads across the UK, so take care if you're travelling this evening. Skies will stay cloudy overnight and heavy rain will gradually clear the southeast. However, further outbreaks of rain are likely, particularly in the north and west. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that has been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties. But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Welcome back to the discussion. This week, Dame Cressida Dick announced her shock resignation last night from a position of Metropolitan Police Commissioner, hours after saying she had no intention of quitting. She had been facing mounting pressure to do so over a series of damaging controversies within the Met. Mayor of London Sadiq Khan had made it clear he had no confidence in her leadership. Dame Cressida Dick stated she felt as if she had no choice but to resign. This resignation has sparked debate about who is responsible for failings within the force. Is it a question of a few bad apples or a cultural, institutional and systemic problem? To help us tease out these questions in this week's Moral Dilemmas, we're joining me down the phone in particular to discuss this is Mike Barton, MBE, former Chief Constable of Durham. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, Mike. Firstly, what is your reaction to the resignation of Cressida Dick?
Well, sadness, but with a touch of inevitability, I think. Whenever anybody's at the top of an organisation and they become the story, I think there's always a sense that it's probably inevitable that it's time to go.
I mean, obviously she was at the top of the Met. I mean, do you think the buck always stops with those at the top? Because some people would argue that actually when it comes to policing, there will always be scandals, there will always be some controversy. Is it very helpful if we constantly have a kind of cycle of people coming, staying for a few years, overseeing a scandal and then leaving?
Yeah, I do have some sympathy with that, Inaya, and I do think it's strange that somebody who is clearly not a misogynist, I know Cressida, she's a really noble and caring person, so for her to take the fall for a culture of misogyny is ironic, isn't it? And you know, there's a big top team in the Met, and I think they all need to look at themselves whether they've supported Cressida as well as they might have been. There are a lot of chief constables, actual chief constables in the Met. There are 6 chief constables. 3 of them have already been chief constables somewhere else. So they all must bear some responsibility for this. I'm not suggesting that all of them go, but it does seem ironic that it should be Cressida Dick who everybody heralded, and quite rightly, as a real sea change in leadership for the Met, should actually have to take the fall.
And what do you make of accusations that the police is systemically misogynistic, systemically racist, systemically corrupt? I mean, do you buy that at all?
Yeah, well, what I do sign up to is any police force in any society will mirror that society. And there is misogyny, there's racism in society. So inevitability, there will be an element of that in the police force. It's incumbent on policing leaders, however, and the systems they create to root it out, to stop it coming in, and if it does come in, to make sure it's rooted out. So that's why disciplinary procedures have got to be absolutely spot on. Vetting procedures have got to be spot on. And if you do find somebody that's unsuitable for policing, then you've got to be ruthless. I used to have a reputation for sacking more people than other police leaders, but I took the view I wasn't sacking them. I was just inviting them to go and do a job to which they were better suited.
Well, we've had people, on the one hand, complaining that police are spending too much time policing tweets rather than the streets. There's been complaints about woke policing on the one hand, and on the other hand, people are saying that not enough is being done to root out these problems. I mean, do you think there is a problem with woke policing, in that police are too focused on issues of racism and sexism and issues like that, when they should actually be dealing with material crime of knife crime and burglary and so on?
Well, I think police should deal with everything that is brought to their attention, but I do think that sometimes some police organisations have been tempted into dealing with, a fashionable line of inquiry rather than what the public actually wants. And I do think that there have been some misunderstandings about exactly how somebody should, the depth of their agitation with something somebody else has done before the police get involved. I do think that the police are in danger in some places of policing free speech. And frankly, I think that should be left to public discourse. I do get worried when police forces aren't going to reports of burglary and not attending crimes, for example, fraud. There's been stories in the last week or so where fraud has not actually been included in the figures that the government have decided involves crime. And my experience of investigating fraud, it's an utterly pernicious crime that needs to be taken seriously.
And finally, Mike, I mean, what do the police need to rebuild that trust and actually to get on with the job? Is it more local policing? Does it need more bobbies on the beat? Does it need more money? I mean, what is it that the police really need?
Well, I'm not entirely sure they need a significant amount more money. I mean, my entire period as chief constable saw my budgets cut by over a third, and I found it useful because it meant that I could actually make redundant the people who probably weren't as good as the others, and we were ended up with a smaller organisation, but paradoxically dealt with more stuff because we weren't carrying people who weren't up to snuff. So I do think that, but I do think there needs to be clarity at the top, and we should stop confusing the whole of policing with the problems of one force, which is the Metropolitan Police. We definitely need to take party politics out of the top of policing. In 1964, there was a major reform of policing in the UK because party politics and local town hall shenanigans was invading the selection and retention of chief constables. And sadly, I think there is signs that party politics are getting their grubby hands on the selection of police leaders, and that is not helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Mike Barton, MB, former Chief Constable of Durham. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Still to come on the discussion, is it time for a radical approach to housing? All that to come, but first, let's get the latest news.
It's 3:33. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's President Zelensky and US President Biden are set to discuss ongoing efforts to de-escalate the crisis with Russia. It comes as some airlines announced that they were cancelling or diverting flights to Ukraine amid fears of an imminent invasion. Earlier, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace cut short a family vacation due to the worsening situation. The Labour Party is urging the government to learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation to help people leave Ukraine if Russia invades. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas. The Prime Minister will leave London this week, insisting he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he'll start the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to an oncology centre in northwest England. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in The Observer, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the country's biggest police force had been shattered by a series of scandals. OK, you're up to date for now, but plenty more still to come with all the main news stories at the top of the next hour.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the discussion. This week saw the continuation of protests by the so-called Freedom Convoy of Canadian truckers opposed to COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Similarly, in France this week, protesters opposed to continued COVID-19 restrictions temporarily blocked part of the Champs-Élysées. In the UK, anti-lockdown campaign successfully reversed the government's proposed policy to mandate vaccines for NHS staff. COVID-19 passports for large gatherings and nightclubs have been, by and large, scrapped also. The growing popular organising for greater freedoms has led some observers to argue that the pandemic era, rather than squash populist activity, could initiate a populist revival. Joining me now to discuss this is Joel Kotkin, Fellow in Urban Studies in Chapman University and author of the coming Neo-Feudalism, a warning to the global middle class. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, Joel. What do you think, personally? Are we seeing a possible populist revival?
Well, I think what we're seeing is, first of all, there is a populist revival in that, the pandemic was part of it. I think the climate change restrictions will become almost a permanent battle between the working class and parts of the middle class and the oligarchy and the people who are at the very top, and also those in the government who are the enforcers. But I think that the middle class, working class, certainly in countries like the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, really feel that they're being pushed against the wall. Now, some of it's irrational. Sometimes it has ugly implications. But for the most part, if you look at the Canadian truckers, whether you agree with what they're trying to do or not, they are basically been very, very lawful, very respectful, have not been particularly violent. Now, I think, at the end of these things, bad things do happen with the Gilets Jaunes in France as well. But there is a greater and greater disconnect between the elites and the population. And what's really interesting is, although there are some left-wing expressions of this, like attempts to organize people at Amazon and Starbucks, which is totally understandable, much of it is really being led by self-employed people, by people who would not fit into the traditional proletariat.
And what do you think about this seemingly new strategy for populists? Rather than trying to get particular candidates elected, maybe they're going for an issue-by-issue approach. So you might have COVID-19 mandates or particular climate policies. I mean, do you think that perhaps is a better strategy than actually trying to get particular candidates elected?
Well, I think it's a good strategy in the sense that it calls things to attention. Unfortunately, we live in a world in which what happens out in the news environment is now so basically interpreted in one particular way that the only way you can really gain attention is by doing something that then gets captured on the TV or gets captured in a YouTube video, gets captured in a podcast. Because, fundamentally, if you're, let's say, the truck drivers or the Gilets Jaunes or whoever's going to follow next, because I think we're going to see more of these kinds of things, they can't rely on the bulk of the legacy media to report their case with any degree of sympathy or even an attempt to understanding. So, in a sense, you have to have this kind of performance art to get anyone's attention. It's really sad because we don't have a political system that is responsive to middle and working class aspirations or needs.
On that point, what do you make of the response to the truckers by the political class? You've had Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, expressing concerns that some of them are racist and all these often accusations that you hear. What do you make of the response so far?
Well, I think Trudeau made a fool of himself, frankly. First of all, anyone who's familiar with trucking, and by the way, the same thing's true here in California. Sikhs, in particular, are a big part of the trucking population. There are lots of African American and Hispanic truck drivers, and certainly in Canada, there was a large number of Sikhs and other non-whites. I mean, this idea that every time I disagree with somebody, they're a racist, they're a misogynist. Instead of saying, okay, I think you're right about this or you're wrong about this, let's have a debate about it. It's this tendency to just throw things at people and to categorize anyone who disagrees with you in these sort of very nefarious terms. It makes it very difficult to have a debate about. There's lots of things we could talk about with COVID. There are lots of things we can talk about climate. Are there things that maybe would make it easier? Are there things that might be available that we're not availing ourselves of? I mean, I'm not making the policy statement, but I think these are expressions of a kind of frustration that the ruling class, and it doesn't really matter whether it's conservative or liberal. Look, in the UK, and Australia, some of these policies are being adopted by so-called conservatives. And in many cases, there is some more sympathy for some of these people on the left, particularly on the what you might call the old Marxist left, who at least recognize a class struggle when they see it. Whereas the class struggle, as seen from people who get money from Jeff Bezos and Apple Computer and Google, is a very different kind of class basis.
And I mean, even as we are seeing some countries like the UK, for example, relinquishing some COVID-19 powers, you rightfully mentioned that a big potential fight on the hands is a lot of the potential constraints and restrictions that might come around climate change policies. I mean, how do you think we keep the spirit of populism alive and make sure that workers and people affected by many of these freedom-curving policies are actually listened to?
Well, I think they're doing the right thing in the sense of they're calling attention to these issues. We've been working here in California, for instance, where in a lot of ways, we are sort of on the cutting edge of sort of what is conventional climate policy, and we're trying to say, look, there are ways that we can deal with a gradual reduction in GHG without destroying the economy, without forcing people to live in little apartments, without making life more difficult. The problem the Greens have now is that their program is basically, let's immiserate the middle and working class to reduce GHG at the same time that China continues to emit more GHG than the US and the EU put together. So, I think that we really need to have a discussion about if we're going to deal with climate change, how are we going to deal with it? Are there better ways? I mean, obviously, things like nuclear power make a certain amount of sense. And the question is, are we going to allow a small group of people who will make a phenomenal amount of money in this energy transition to dictate life for the vast majority of people? And I think what we're seeing in Canada today and what we're seeing with the truckers is just the beginning.
And finally, Joel, I mean, do you have much hope out for the left of politics? I mean, we do often hear them talking more about cultural issues of identity than material questions of inequality. What do you think?
Well, I think the people, if you want to call it on the liberal side, and I've been the Democrat most of my life. I think if they listen to people like Roy Teixeira or James Carville, who have who look at this and say, if you focused on the basic issues, reshoring of industry back particularly from China, providing health care, the whole series of issues which the left, if it focused on, would actually be quite popular. The question is that the cultural left, if you will, the people who are more interested in how many African Americans are on the board of Google than how many African Americans actually get good middle class jobs, because that I think is going to be a problem. But if the left goes back and starts serving the role it should play in helping middle and working class people, it could come back. The problem is that there are probably too too many professors and too many people with inherited wealth to make that happen.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, Joel Kochkin, Fellow in Urban Studies at Chapman University. Well, a YouGov poll published this week found that there was considerable support amongst Britons for more government intervention in housing policy, often quite radical policy proposals, actually. According to the poll, 67% support a cap on rental rates, 65% support councils compulsorily purchasing long-term empty properties at below market rate to be turned into social housing. 49% supported forbidding those whose primary country of residence is not the UK from buying a house here. With rising rental prices, a record rise in house prices, a shortage of social housing, is it any wonder that 81% of Britons think housing is an issue in the UK, a very significant one at the moment? But where is the radical policy proposals by the Conservatives or the Labour Party? Joining me now to discuss whether it's time for a radical approach to housing is Ike Ije, Head of Housing, Architecture and Urban Spaces at Policy Exchange, and Labour Councillor Leo Gibbons, who is also the co-director of Price Doubt UK. Thank you both for joining me this afternoon. I want to start with Leo when he comes in. I'll start with you, Leo. Are you surprised by some of the polling that I've just described about the public support quite significantly for quite radical policy proposals?
Not particularly, no. I think most of us understand that there is a housing crisis. Most individuals who are in generation rent, like myself, feel it, and those of an older generation can see that their children aren't buying property to the same extent that they were or they were able to. So I think the awareness of the housing crisis and the salience of the housing crisis amongst the public is particularly high, and it's reflected in that policy. People want things to be done. They want intervention into the housing market. Unfortunately, that polling didn't really get to the crux of the issue, which is an undersupply of housing, particularly in areas of the highest want and demand. And some of those policies that were polled very popular, I don't think are the answer, and that's kind of my personal view. But I'm not surprised at all that people realise that we are in the grips of a terrible housing crisis.
And like you wrote recently in Conservative Home about the government's white paper and essentially describing that, on levelling up in particular, that they didn't really have substantial proposals when it came to housing. I mean, could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, basically, on one level, and don't be too negative, the white paper was encouraging in the sense there was a scale of ambition about it. There's a recognition of the problem, and there was, in terms of at least ambition, if not in terms of concrete policy, there was a kind of commitment to do something about it. But my problem was it didn't go far enough. It was more about tinkering around the edges, kind of elaborating on existing schemes, rather than some of the kind of more radical solutions that I think are needed for to solve the housing crisis in the country.
I mean, Leo, why do you think there does seem to be resistance to doing something quite radical? I mean, salaries are 6, 7, 8, 9 times in terms of when it comes to the house prices. I mean, salaries are just not keeping up. I mean, it just seemed like a huge opportunity for any government to actually do things that will really improve the material lives of people in this country. Why do you think there's seemingly no political will for it?
I think fundamentally it's because the policies that would really radically help aren't that particularly popular. For example, there was no polling around support for building 300,000 new homes each year, which is a government manifesto pledge. It's something that Price Doubt supports. I'm sure people would be supportive of that. However, if you then poll them on whether they want some of that 300,000 homes at the end of their back garden, suddenly the polling flips and people don't want it. And a problem we have at the moment is that we ration land through our planning system. We have very strict rules on where housing can be built. And actually to open up that, to build on greenfield sites, which we will certainly need to be doing if we are to hit our housing targets over the coming decades, if we are to reform the green belt which we would like to see. Those actual policies that will lead to those homes being allowed to be built, those aren't so popular. And there's lots of reasons for that. There is some genuine kind of conservatism that you don't want your neighbourhood to change. There is also a cynicism behind some politicians. They don't need to win the votes of potentially new residents who might buy homes one day in their constituency. They need to win votes of people already there, and the voters who don't want new homes built in their backyard. Also, even more cynically perhaps, there are some MPs, perhaps in the kind of green sort of suburbs around London, who don't want to see new homes that could potentially have Labour voting young professionals moving in. So there's lots of hurdles on the Conservative side, and on the Labour side, sometimes there's a failing to understand basic economics. And actually, also, there is a want in local government to hold on to what powers they have to block new homes. Councillors around the country aren't really that powerful, but one thing we do have is a discretionary power to potentially veto new homes. And trying to get local councillors like myself to give up that power, that's incredibly challenging. So I'm just giving you lots and lots of reasons why the policies that we need to deliver aren't really happening. The ambition is there, but the actual drive to make it happen is too thorny for this government so far.
And what do you make of that argument that perhaps from the Tory side it's what's politically expedient? You had the NIMBY is not in my backyard is a significant Tory voter base, but also I guess in a perhaps more charitable argument you might say that who really wants a big high-rise building not far from their place? Maybe that's what people imagine when they think of social housing or doing big housing building drives. I mean, what do you think? Do we need to maybe rethink how we plan and how we design, as an architect yourself?
Well, to a degree, yes. And part of the reason why new housing developments tend to be unpopular is because people are afraid that they're going to be ugly and they're going to blight their communities and they're going to basically provide profit for people who move into them or own them, but they won't actually provide any benefit for them, the original people who are there. So as part of the strategy, obviously I would say as an architect, I think design has to play a role as well. We need to design homes better so that there's less opposition to them. You'll never get rid of opposition entirely. Some people just like spaces to stay as they were when they moved in. But design is definitely an ingredient, and I'm not criticizing the entire industry, but bad design, bad housing, inappropriate housing, tall buildings where they're maybe not appropriate, developments that aren't contextual, they're not kind of focused on the neighborhood and the community and local character. Those things are bad, and that's the kind of thing that generates opposition to housing. So that's part of it. It's a big part of it. But there's the thing about this. I don't think there's no one easy solution. It's lots of different things. It's supply side. We need to build more. There's demand side as well. It needs to be a really holistic, visionary approach, which is why the role of government's the only organisation really that can coalesce and force people to kind of get together and do this. That's why the role of government is so important. So yes, design is crucial as well.
Well, thank you both for joining me this afternoon. Ike AJ, Head of Housing, Architecture and Urban Spaces at Policy Exchange, and Labour Councillor Leo Gibbons, who is also co-director of Priced Out UK. I mean, I hope if anyone's listening from the government, this is clearly an issue that's very important to the British people, and there is a huge opportunity here to improve the material lives of many people, particularly young people in this country. Anyway, that's all from us on The Discussion. See you at the same time next week. Next up is Nana Akua. Thank you.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking rather wet and windy at first, but rain and wind will gradually ease overnight. Let's take a look at the details. After a rather wet day in the southwest, it will turn drier this evening. Winds will gradually ease too, but it will be remaining on the cloudy side. A wetter end to the day across the southeast as heavy and persistent rain continues. It'll be windy here too. Also a cloudy end today across Wales, but rain will be lighter than it was earlier. Patchy rain and drizzle will continue throughout the evening and overnight. Across the Midlands now, rain will gradually ease, leaving a cloudy evening with outbreaks of drizzle at times. Heavy rain will clear northern England this evening, but the thick cloud could still bring some light rain at times. The cloud and brisk wind will keep temperatures up. It will be a wetter end to the day across Scotland, with some persistent rain and a little snow as well over the Highlands. Now, a damp end to the day also across Northern Ireland. The rain from earlier will bring a fair amount of spray on the roads across the UK, so take care if you're travelling this evening. Skies will stay cloudy overnight and heavy rain will gradually clear the southeast. However, further outbreaks of rain are likely, particularly in the north and west. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join